Hi friends, write in the comments what city you are from. Perhaps you also had similar stories. It is very interesting to know what happened in your corner of the world. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like it, share your thoughts or stories in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. There are more exciting and unexpected stories ahead. All characters and events described in this story are fictitious. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. Do not judge strictly. The rain fell in thin, relentless streams, soaking the black umbrellas that swayed like mourners' heads in the gray light of the cemetery. The grass beneath their feet had turned to mud, into which their heels sank as if into a shaky past. The tombstones around them, strange, mute, seemed to merge into a single gray spot. Only one coffin stood out against this background, fresh, alien, improbable. Tom Harris stood apart from the crowd, his broad shoulders hunched beneath a damp wool coat. At 38, he was a man whose reserve reflected his profession as an architect, every movement measured as if he were drawing lines in the air. But today his arms hung limply at his sides, his fingers twitching as if searching for something to grab onto that no longer existed. The coffin gleamed dully in the rain, its polished mahogany a cruel mockery of warmth. Emily, his wife of only 3 years, lay inside. 3 years like 3 breaths, like one room, one autumn, one melody. They had accomplished so little. He had not taken her to Tuscany, where she had dreamed of going since she was a child, or shown her the lake house he was planning to design for them both. He had not heard her laughing in the rocking chair over old movies, or seen her ironing the bedspread in the nursery they had talked about in the evenings in half-whispers. Cancer was merciless, taking her away piece by piece, like erasing a sketch from a blueprint. Tom tried to hold on to her laughter, but it was slipping away like the steam from a cup of tea in that last room. The woman whose voice had once made him forget deadlines and blueprints was a fragile shadow, her green eyes fading like a lantern running out of oil. He didn't cry, not in the hospital, not when the doctor's voice broke with pity, not now, as the priest's words dissolved in the rain. His grief was a stone lodged in his chest, too heavy to release, too sharp to ignore. Sometimes he thought that was all that was left of her, the weight of that stone. And somewhere deep in that stone lived unspoken words, unfulfilled dreams, and those minutes that he would like to live again more slowly, more attentively, as if he knew how quickly their forever was measured out. The mourners filed out slowly, their condolences flying past like dry leaves in the wind, light, rustling, meaningless. Someone squeezed his hand, someone put a hand on his shoulder, someone whispered, "Hang in there, Tom." He nodded. He smiled, the corner of his mouth, the way he had learned to do over all these weeks of trying to look strong. But he heard no one. The world sounded as if through glass, as if he were inside a huge vase filled with rain and the hum of his own heart. Clara, Emily's sister, lingered longer than anyone else. Her cloak was clinging to her body, her hair was in damp strands, but she seemed oblivious to the cold. She came closer and glanced at him, as if hoping to find in his face some reflection of the woman they had just buried. "Tom," she said carefully, almost afraid to disturb something fragile. Her fingers touched his hand softly. "Come see us later. You shouldn't be alone." He didn't answer right away. The word stuck in his throat like a bone. "I don't know," he finally squeezed out. "I don't know what to do with myself." Clara squeezed his fingers. "No one knows. Just don't disappear. Don't close yourself off." She wouldn't want that. He nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on the coffin, which was already halfway lowered into the ground. The wet rope slid along the wood, and the sound was unbearable to him. "We were just getting started," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "We had a list. So many places. She wanted a bike ride through France. Vineyards, she said, and a house with red shutters. And a dog." Clara swallowed, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I remember. She wrote to me. She wanted to name the dog Pesto. Do you remember?" Tom smiled slightly, crookedly and joylessly. "Because pesto smells like summer," he repeated, remembering Emily saying it, squinting against the sun, laughing as she cooked pasta in their tiny kitchen. Clara ran her fingers down his sleeve. You can go. Build that house. You can. Without her, he looked at Clara, and there was no anger or reproach in his gaze, only emptiness. Everything I wanted only made sense with her. She said nothing. What could one say to that? Clara paused, then nodded. Deeply, like someone who had accepted a refusal. She turned and walked slowly back to the others. Her heels sank into the mud, leaving dark prints that were quickly washed away by the rain. The cemetery workers began their work, their shovels biting into the wet earth with indifferent skill. The sound of breaking soil was dry and merciless. Tom didn't look. He turned and walked toward his truck. The world around him was muffled, as if someone had turned down the volume of life itself. Drops pounded the hood, but he didn't feel the rain. Just an emptiness inside him, and the weight of that emptiness seemed heavier than the entire sky above him. The house was a crypt. Tom paused in the doorway of his now Cape Cod house, which he had designed with Emily in mind. The clean lines, the wide windows catching the morning light, the porch where they had dreamed of growing old together. It was an empty shell now. Emily's watercolors still hung on the walls, their bright colors an indictment. Her blue scarf, the one she had worn even in the hospital, lay on the arm of the sofa. He did not touch it. He could not. He shrugged off his coat, letting it fall to the floor, and walked across the living room like a ghost. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding present from Emily's parents. Tom had always hated its relentless rhythm, but Emily loved it, saying it reminded her of the relentless march of time. Now each tick sounded like the beating of a heart she no longer had. Tom sank into a chair by the window, looking out at the street, glistening with rain. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where people wave from their porches and know your dog's name. Emily had blossomed here, planting peonies in the yard, charming the neighbors with her quick smile. Tom, always reserved, was happy to remain in the shadow of her light, letting her fill their world with warmth. Without her, he was just a man in a house too big for one. His gaze fell on the coffee table, where a stack of unopened condolence cards lay, a monument to his reluctance to deal with them. He hadn't read any of them. What was the point? Words wouldn't bring her back. Words wouldn't fill the emptiness that grew with every breath he took. He tipped his head back, closing his eyes, trying to feel something anything but this crushing emptiness. A soft tap on the porch made him sit up abruptly. The mailbox. He hadn't checked it in days, maybe weeks. Bills and catalogs and letters of condolence must have piled up, but the thought of sorting through them was like diving into quicksand. Still, the sound was jarring, a small prick in his days. He sighed, rose, and trudged toward the door. The mailbox was as full as he expected. Tom pulled out a stack of envelopes, most of them white, neatly addressed from undertakers or well-meaning friends. He was about to toss them on the table with the others when one caught his eye. It was different, smaller, cream-colored, with no return address. On the front was his name in a familiar, elegant script that made his heart skip a beat. Tom Harris. He froze, raindrops dripping from his hair onto the envelope. It was impossible. He turned it over, his fingers shaking as he saw the signature in the bottom corner, yours, Amy. The world rocked. He retreated into the house, clutching the letter as if it might disappear. His breathing became ragged as he sank onto the sofa, looking at the envelope as if it were a relic from another life. Emily's handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, but playful, with a small flourish on the letter N, whom she always teased him for trying to imitate in his sketches. But Emily was gone. She had been gone for weeks, her body weakened long before her spirit had faded. This had to be a mistake, a cruel joke, or something else. His hands shook as he tore open the envelope, careful not to damage the paper inside. The letter was written on the same cream-colored paper Emily kept in her desk for the thank-you notes and love letters she slipped into his briefcase. The sight of it made his throat tighten. He unfolded the paper slowly, his eyes scanning the words as if they might burn. My beloved Tom, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I know it sounds dramatic, like something out of a movie, but I don't know how else to begin. I'm sitting here, watching you sleep in that chair you hate, trying to find the words to say goodbye. But goodbye feels too final, too small for what we have together. So I write this, hoping it will find you when you need it most. I knew it would happen, Tom. Not because I'm psychic or anything, but because I could feel it, the way my body was giving in, even when my heart wasn't ready. I didn't tell you because I couldn't stand the look in your eyes, the one you get when you're trying to fix something that's already broken. You're so good at fixing things, my love, but you couldn't fix me. There's so much I want to say, but for now I'll keep it short. I need you to keep living, Tom. I know you're hurting, and you'll want to shut the world out. But you're stronger than you think, and there's so much beauty out there waiting for you. I left you with something, call it a thread, a little piece of me to guide you. You'll find it if you look. Don't be afraid to feel again, even if it hurts. Especially if it hurts. I'm still here in my own way. You'll see. Yours, Amy. Tom read the letter over and over again, his hands shaking, searching for any hint that it was a fake, a cruel joke. But every word was hers, the rhythm, the warmth, the way she teased him even in her last moments. He could almost hear her voice, soft and sure, as if she were sitting next to him. But how? When could she have written this? Cancer had weakened her so much in the last weeks that she could barely hold a pen. And yet the ink was fresh, the paper unwrinkled, as if the letter had been written yesterday. He stood up abruptly, still clutching the letter, and walked to the desk where Emily kept her stationery. The drawer was exactly as she had left it, pens lined up neatly, cream envelopes stacked. The box of paper was there, half empty, just as he remembered. He pulled out the sheet and compared it to the letter. Identical. His heart pounded as he rummaged through the drawer, searching for some sign that this was someone else's work. There was nothing. He tried to read the letter again, but the words were blurry. His eyes stung. His throat tightened as if a lump of glass had settled inside. He clenched his teeth, trying to hold it all in, as he had done all this time, but now he couldn't. At first it was a quiet sob, ragged and hoarse, almost shamefaced. Then another, louder. And suddenly it all burst, like a dam that had held for too long. He covered his face with his hands, and sobs overwhelmed him. Not suppressed tears, but helpless, exhausted cries that contained everything. Love, loss, anger, longing, guilt, and the impossible why. He bent over the letter as if it were something sacred, as if by pressing against it, he could bring her back, even for a second. The house was quiet, only the rain pounded the windows, and that pounding seemed less lonely now. Through the tears, through the pain, he suddenly felt that she was really there, not with her body, not with her voice, but with something deeper. As if the letter had become her hand, reaching out through time and death to remind him, "You are not alone." He pressed the sheet to his chest, and in that movement was everything he had not managed to say, everything that was left, everything he would have to start over from scratch. Morning came to Tom Harris's house without warning, like an intruder sneaking through the cracks in the curtains. Light streamed into the living room, illuminating motes of dust that swirled in the air like tiny ghosts. Tom sat on the same sofa where he had torn open the envelope the night before, clutching Emily's letter in his hands. The paper was already crumpled by his fingers, but he still held on to it, as if he were afraid it would melt away like a mirage. The night had passed in a strange daze. He had not slept, he had not eaten, he had only reread the words that seemed at once hers and not hers. How could she have written this? When? And why has it only appeared now? Tom stood, his joints creaking in protest, reminding him that he was no longer young and that the body, unlike the mind, was incapable of pretending that everything was all right. He placed the letter on the coffee table, next to the untouched stack of condolences, and went to the coffee maker. Routine was what saved him when the world was falling apart. He turned on the machine, and its familiar hiss filled the kitchen, momentarily drowning out the ticking of the clock in the hallway. The coffee was as bitter as his thoughts, but he took a sip anyway, standing by the window and looking out onto the empty street. The neighbor's dog, a golden retriever named Max, trotted lazily along the sidewalk, his owner, an old man in a plaid cap, trailing behind. Life went on outside, indifferent to his personal catastrophe. Returning to the living room, Tom picked up the letter again. His gaze caught on the phrase, "You're angry now. That's okay." He frowned. Anger? No, he wasn't angry. He was as empty as the house, as empty as his own reflection in the mirror. But Emily's words, so vivid, so precise, as if she were sitting across from him now, ignited something in him that he didn't want to acknowledge. This wasn't just a letter, it was a provocation, a challenge to his rational mind. Tom, an architect to the core, was used to taking the world apart, measuring it, fitting it into blueprints. But this defied logic. He put the letter down and began to rummage through the contents of her desk drawer. Nothing new. Old receipts, a couple of her favorite pens with worn caps, a few watercolor sketches she'd never finished. No sign of any other letters, no clue as to how this one had ended up in the mailbox. He even checked the box of stationery, the same cream-colored paper, but nothing out of the ordinary. Tom closed the drawer so hard the knobs inside jingled and headed for the front door. The mailbox, maybe there was something else in there. The box was almost empty, just a couple of flyers and an electric bill. But at the very bottom, pressed against the cold metal, was another envelope. The same cream color, with his name written in the same handwriting, Tom Harris. And again, the signature in the corner, yours, Amy. His heart pounded, his fingers trembled as he pulled out the envelope. This time he didn't hesitate, he tore it open right there on the porch, ignoring the cold wind that fluttered his shirt. My dear Tom, you're angry right now. That's okay. I know you think this is some kind of joke, that someone is playing with your emotions. You're probably going through my things, checking my mailbox, trying to find an explanation. But listen to me, my love. Not everything in life can be laid out like your blueprints. Sometimes you just have to trust. I know it's hard for you. You blame yourself, even though I've told you 1,000 times that it's not your fault. You couldn't save me, but you gave me 3 years of happiness that were worth a lifetime. Remember how we danced in the kitchen to that old Frank Sinatra song? You stepped on my feet, and I laughed until I cried. I want you to find those moments again, Tom. Not right away, but eventually. Do something simple today. Go to our favorite coffee shop, the one where I always got my cinnamon latte. Sit by the window and just look at the people. They don't know what you've lost, but their lives will remind you that the world is still spinning. And I'm still here, in these little things. Look for me. Yours, Amy. Tom stood staring at the letter, his breath coming out of his chest as if he'd run a mile. It wasn't possible. Emily was dead. She couldn't know he'd be angry, that he'd go through her things, that he'd even find the letter. And yet the words were so, hers. She'd always known how to get through his walls, how to pull him out of the dark corners of his own mind. But it couldn't be true. Someone had to have set this up. He walked back into the house, clutching the letter so tightly that the paper was beginning to tear at the edges. His mind, accustomed to logic and order, demanded an explanation. Could it be Clara? She was close to Emily, knew her handwriting, her manner of speaking. But why? And how could she imitate her voice, her intonation, so perfectly? Tom grabbed the phone and dialed Clara's number, but paused before pressing the call. What would he say? Your dead sister is sending me letters? It sounded crazy, even in his head. Instead, he called the local post office. The woman on the other end of the line, her voice tired, said they had no record of delivering individual letters without a return address. Maybe someone just dropped it in your box, Mr. Harris, she said, and Tom felt his irritation grow. He thanked her through clenched teeth and hung up. He spent the next hour making the rounds of his neighbors. Mrs. Kelly, an elderly woman with 3 cats, swore she hadn't seen anyone at his mailbox. The young guy with the lawnmower who lived across the street just shrugged and suggested checking the security cameras. Tom didn't have any cameras. Emily always said they were a bummer. He returned home feeling more lost than ever. Sitting at the kitchen table, Tom unfolded the 2 letters and laid them side by side. The first, with its soft, almost comforting words, and the second, with its strange, almost mocking precision. You're angry now. That's okay. He was genuinely angry at the letters, at their impossibility, at himself for not being able to just brush them aside. He stood up and paced the kitchen, his thoughts veering between the rational and the absurd. Was this some old project of Emily's? Had she written these letters in advance, knowing she was dying, and asked someone to deliver them? But who? And why were they appearing now, out of order? He decided to check her laptop. Emily rarely used it. She preferred paper and pencil for her ideas. But if she had been planning something like this, there might be traces there. The laptop, an old MacBook with a faded daisy sticker, was lying in her office, on a desk littered with sketches and art books. Tom turned it on, and the screen came to life, showing the wallpaper of their wedding photo. He paused, looking at her smile, so alive, so distant. The password their anniversary, he entered it on the first try. The laptop was almost empty. A few folders with photos, a couple of documents with her watercolor notes. Nothing out of the ordinary. He checked his email, his cloud storage, even his trash, nothing. No drafts of letters, no hints of a plan. Just an old letter from himself, with the subject line, "Love you," sent a month before she died. He didn't open it. Tom leaned back in his chair, feeling his anger give way to exhaustion. He didn't know what to look for next. But the words in the second email about the coffee shop, about the cinnamon latte, had haunted him. It was their coffee shop, Bean and Leaf, 2 blocks from their house. Emily loved the place. The wooden tables, the smell of freshly ground coffee, the window overlooking the busy street. She always ordered a cinnamon latte, and he teased her, calling it dessert in a cup. Was this her way of reminding him of something? Or someone's cruel game? He didn't want to go. The idea seemed ridiculous, almost insulting. But something in him, maybe desperate hope, or just the weariness of fighting himself, made him grab his jacket and walk out the door. The street greeted him with a cold wind, but he stubbornly walked forward, his boots squelching on the wet pavement. The coffee shop was almost empty, just a couple of students in the corner, and a barista lazily wiping down the counter. Tom ordered a black coffee. He wasn't going to indulge these letters until the end, and sat by the window as she'd asked. People passed by. A woman pushing a stroller, a boy with headphones, an old man with a newspaper under his arm. Life, so ordinary, so alien. Tom watched them, trying to figure out what Emily wanted him to see. Nothing happened. No one came up to him, left a mysterious envelope, looked at him with a meaningful smile. Only the coffee grew cold in his hands, and the anger Emily had spoken of grew, mixing with something else, a longing so deep it almost physically ached. He was about to leave when he noticed something on the windowsill. A small drawing scratched into the wooden frame, almost unnoticeable. A tiny flower, a daisy like the sticker on her old laptop, peeling with age but stubbornly staying in place. Tom froze. His heart trembled like a string struck by an unexpected chord. He leaned closer, ran the pad of his finger over the carving. The lines were imprecise, as if drawn in haste or with a trembling hand, but that was her style, spontaneous, like life itself. Daisies, Emily always drew them, on napkins at cafes, on the corners of her architectural sketches, on the palm of his hand, on the couch on lazy Sundays. Small white flowers, her personal signatures. He shared this memory with no one. No one knew how much it meant. No one but her. He straightened up slowly, his eyes clouding. This couldn't be a coincidence. Not just a scratch. Not just a mark. Someone new. Or was it her? The world around him seemed to shift. The air became thicker, as if something was lingering in it, a breath, a presence. Subtle, barely discernible, but palpable. He heard a rustling sound, as if a sheet of paper had moved on the table, even though the window was closed. Or was it simply his heart? Tom returned home, not remembering the way. His thoughts were seething like a river after a rainstorm, muddy, chaotic, rapid. A letter, a flower, her voice in words he could almost hear. You'll see. Too real, too impossible. He sat down at the table and laid out both letters in front of him. The first, official, written in clear, neat handwriting, and the second, the one that was kept in the hidden envelope, warm, alive, hers. He began to read them again, word by word, syllable by syllable, as if searching for a code. His fingers trembled. Sometimes he felt as if there was another letter hidden between the lines, something written just for him, just now. But instead of answers, he found only new questions. Who had left the daisy? Was it part of something bigger? Or was he simply clinging to ghosts? But somewhere deep inside, in a place he had avoided for a long time, a tiny, barely noticeable spark of hope was born. Dangerous, like the first ice under his feet. Merciless, like a memory that refuses to fade. What if she's really still here? Not with his body, not with his voice, but in his own way, in these letters, in the flower, in his heart, which, despite everything, never stopped waiting. Tom woke up on the couch, his neck stiff from the awkward position, and the room smelled of cold coffee and dampness. The light outside was pale, as if the sun had decided not to try today. He didn't remember when he fell asleep, but the crumpled pillow and the two letters lying on his chest reminded him of yesterday. The daisy on the windowsill of the coffee shop was still before his eyes, small but so familiar that it made his chest ache. He tried to brush the image aside, to write it off as a coincidence, but something inside him, stubborn, almost childish, wouldn't let him. Tom stood, rubbing his eyes, and headed for the kitchen to make fresh coffee. He tried to hold on to the routine like a lifeline, but his thoughts kept returning to the letters. They lay on the table, their cream envelopes standing out against the gray chaos of his life. He didn't want to read them again. It felt too much like opening an old wound, but something told him he wouldn't have to wait long. If two letters had appeared so suddenly, there might be a third. He was proven right sooner than he expected. As he stepped out onto the porch to pick up the morning paper, his gaze fell on the mailbox. The door was slightly ajar, as if someone had been in a hurry and hadn't bothered to close it. Tom felt his pulse quicken. He walked over, opened the box, and saw another envelope, same cream color, same handwriting, same stab to the heart, Tom Harris. Signature in the corner, yours, Amy. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he walked back into the house, clutching the envelope as if it might disappear if he loosened his grip. Sitting at the kitchen table, Tom carefully opened the letter. His fingers moved slowly, almost reverently, as if he were afraid to startle something fragile. The paper was the same as the previous letters, with a faint scent of vanilla, or was that his imagination? He unfolded the sheet and began to read. My beloved Tom, you're still looking for answers, aren't you? I see you, sitting at your desk, frowning, trying to fit together a puzzle that won't fit. You've always been like this, making plans, drawing lines, trying to make the world obey logic. But sometimes life isn't a blueprint. It's a watercolor where the colors flow as they please. Today, I want you to do something for me. Open the box of my things. The one in the closet, under the old blanket. You know what I mean? You've been avoiding it because you're afraid of what you'll find. And I don't blame you, I would be too. But there are pieces of me in there, pieces of us. They're waiting for you. Don't be afraid to delve into the past, Tom. It won't bite. It will just remind you of who you are. I know you think it's impossible that someone is playing you, but think about it. Would anyone else know how much you hated my old sneakers, or how we argued about where to hang that painting of sunflowers? It's me, Tom. Somehow, it's me. Yours, Amy. Tom put the letter down, his hands shaking. The box in the closet. He knew what she was talking about, even though he didn't want to admit it. It was an old wooden box Emily had brought from her parents' house when they got married. She called it her time capsule, a place where she kept her memories, from childhood drawings to tickets to their first concert together. Tom had never looked in there, considering it her private space. Even after she died, he had been hesitant to open the box, as if it would be an intrusion into her world, a world he could no longer share. He stood up, his heart pounding in his chest, and headed for the closet. The door creaked, releasing the smell of dust and old things. Under the pile of blankets, just as Emily had written, was a box, worn, with peeling paint on the lid. Tom pulled it out, set it on the living room floor, and stood there, staring at it like Pandora's box. His fingers hovered over the lid, but the words in the letter, "Don't be afraid to delve into the past," they pushed him. He took a deep breath and opened the box. There was more inside than he expected. At the very top were her old sneakers, the ones he hated for their tattered appearance, but which she insisted on wearing, claiming that they held her adventures. Tom smiled, but the smile quickly faded, replaced by a twinge of pain. He set the sneakers aside and began to sort through the contents. There were pictures of her as a child, Emily on a bike with pigtails, Emily with ice cream smeared on her face, Emily at prom, her eyes shining with the same sparkle he'd seen when he first met her. He ran his finger across one of the photos, feeling a pang of nostalgia in his chest. Next, he found a stack of papers, drafts of letters, written in her own hand. Some were addressed to him, others to her parents, friends, even to herself. One letter, dated from their first year of marriage, began, "Tom, if you ever read this, know that I have never been happier." He felt tears sting his eyes, but he blinked them away quickly. It was too much. Too much like her, too much like her. Among the papers was a list of books, written on a piece of squared paper. Emily loved to read, and her tastes were eclectic, from classic Jane Austen novels to modern thrillers. The list was titled Books I Want Tom to Read. He ran his eyes over the titles. 100 Years of Solitude, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Little Life, Hanya Yanagihara. Road, Cormac McCarthy. She left short notes next to each title. "This will make you cry, but it's worth it. Read this when you're ready to let go." Tom felt his throat tighten. She knew he'd be here, alone, trying to make sense of her absence. He kept digging through the box, finding more pieces of their lives. A ticket to a Lumineers concert, where they danced in the rain until their clothes were soaking wet. A note he'd written to her on a napkin on their first anniversary. "You are my best project." The small glass bottle that had once held her perfume, the light floral scent he could still smell when he closed his eyes. Each object was like a blow, not a painful one, but a warm one, filled with memories he had tried so hard to avoid. Tom leaned back on the couch, holding one of her watercolors, a sketch of their house from before they'd moved in. She'd painted it with such love, with such detail, that he felt like he was standing next to her again, listening to her dream of the future. The nostalgia was overwhelming, but with it came a bitterness as sharp as a blade. Why hadn't she told him about the letters? Why had she left him to deal with this alone? He wanted to be angry, wanted to blame her for making him relive it all, but he couldn't. Because this was Emily. His Emily, who always knew how to get through to him, even when he didn't want to. He returned to the letter and reread the last line. "It's me, Tom. Somehow, it's me." His mind, accustomed to logic, still resisted. He thought about calling Clara again, but discarded the idea. Instead, he decided to check the mailbox again, although he knew it was pointless. The box was empty, but he noticed something strange on the porch, a small daisy petal stuck to the wet board. He picked it up, feeling the cold creep into his fingers. This couldn't be an accident. Not after the coffee shop, not after the box. Tom returned to the house and sat down at the table, spreading out the 3 letters and the contents of the box in front of him. He tried to piece it all together, but the pieces didn't fit. The letters were too personal, too precise to be fake. But how did they get there? Who brought them? And why did daisies, her favorite symbol, appear where he found them? He felt like he was drowning in questions, but at the same time he couldn't stop. It was like a drawing he couldn't complete, but which beckoned him to continue. That night, for the first time in a long time, he turned on music, the Frank Sinatra song she'd mentioned in her second letter. The melody filled the house, and for a moment he imagined her there, dancing in the kitchen, laughing at his clumsy steps. He closed his eyes, letting the music carry him back to simpler days. But when the song ended, the silence returned, and with it the knowledge that he was alone. And yet, somewhere in that silence, he felt her. Not a ghost, not a vision, but something as subtle as her perfume, like a daisy petal on the porch. Tom knew he wouldn't stop. He would search, he would open the drawers, read her words, follow her clues, because even if it was impossible, even if it was some cruel illusion, he couldn't stop believing that she was still with him. Somehow. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows on the asphalt, when Tom left the house, clutching another letter in his pocket. It had appeared this morning, like the previous ones, soundlessly, as if thrown by an invisible hand. He was no longer surprised, although his rational mind still clung to the idea that this was someone's game. But with each new letter, his doubts weakened, dissolving into a strange, almost magical certainty that Emily was somehow still talking to him. He did not open the envelope right away, but put it in his jacket pocket, deciding that he would read it later, when he was ready. Or, perhaps, when he decided what to do next. The day was cool, with a light breeze that carried the scent of fallen leaves. Tom walked down the street, feeling the rhythmic click of his boots on the sidewalk. He didn't know where he was going until he stopped at an intersection, where his gaze fell on a familiar sign, City Park. The place where he and Emily had spent so many evenings, walking the paths, laughing at silly jokes, or just sitting silently on a bench, watching the ducks in the pond. His heart sank, but he didn't turn away. Something was pulling him there, like an invisible thread connecting him to her letters. Returning home for a cup of coffee, he finally decided to open the envelope. Sitting at the kitchen table, he carefully cut the paper with a knife, trying not to damage it. Emily's handwriting was as soft as always, with slight swirls that he could recognize even in his sleep. He began to read, feeling her voice come alive in his head. My beloved Tom, you're starting to ask fewer questions, I can feel it. You may still think this is someone's joke, but somewhere inside you already know it's me. Thank you for opening my box. I know how hard it was for you to touch these things, but you did it, and I'm proud of you. Now I want you to move on. Come back to the park, Tom. The one where we ate ice cream in the heat and argued about which tasted better, your boring vanilla or my raspberry. Sit on our bench, the one by the pond, where I once dropped a sandal in the water and you laughed until you hiccuped. Just be there. Listen to the world around you. There are people there who remember me, and maybe they can remind you that life is not all pain. You are not alone, even if it seems so. I am in every leaf, in every reflection on the water. Look for me there. Yours, Amy. Tom put the letter down, his fingers hovering on the edge of the table. The park, he hadn't been there since Emily had been ill. The place seemed too alive, too full of her, for him to bear its emptiness without her. But her words, listen to the world around you, rang in his head like a melody that was impossible to forget. He did not want to go, but his legs were already carrying him to the door. He put on his jacket, put the letter in his pocket, and went out, feeling the cold air bite his cheeks. The city park greeted him with the rustling of leaves and the distant laughter of children playing on the playground. Autumn enveloped everything in a soft, warm sadness. Golden leaves swirled in the air, as if they did not want to touch the ground, and everything around seems frozen in silence, which no one dared to disturb. Paths wound between old oaks, whose mighty branches bent under the weight of leaves in time. The smell of damp earth, wet bark, and the fading sun was surprisingly alive. Tom walked slowly, as if afraid to disturb the memories. His gaze slid over familiar places. There was the flower bed where Emily had once tried to photograph a butterfly, but instead captured his displeased face when he sneezed at that very moment. He had grumbled then, and she had laughed so infectiously that passers-by turned around. There was the bridge where they had kissed in the rain, soaking wet but happy they had not taken cover then. They had deliberately stayed in the downpour, and Emily had said, "If we are going to get wet, we should get wet together." The memories were so vivid that he could almost feel her next to him, the lightness of her step, next to him, the scent of her scarf, the rough sound of her voice as she read aloud. It seemed as if he only had to turn around, and she would be there, warm, alive, smiling. He found their bench by the pond. It was still there, a little askew, its green paint peeling, but still as strong as their memory. Tom sat down, feeling the cool wood press against his back, as if hugging him. The pond in front of him was calm, dark gray, like a mirror covered in mist. A light breeze rippled the surface, and the ducks lazily traced the surface with their leisurely movements. He stared into the water, and suddenly it all seemed almost sacred. A place where time passed differently, where you could talk to someone who was gone and be heard. "I've come, Em," he said quietly. "I'm here, but why?" Look at the ducks. Just sit. It seemed too simple, almost banal. But Emily never did anything just for the sake of it. There was always something more to her letters, hidden beneath the surface. A few minutes later, an elderly man with a cane approached the bench. His wrinkled face was vaguely familiar, but Tom couldn't remember where he had seen it before. The man stopped, leaning on his cane, and looked at Tom with a slight smile. "Do you mind if I sit down?" he asked, his voice hoarse but warm. Tom nodded, moving aside to make room. The man sat up with a sigh of relief and pulled a small packet of duck food from his pocket. He dropped a handful into the water, and the ducks immediately swam up, quacking and pushing. "I love coming here," the man said, not looking at Tom. "Reminds me of the good old days. My wife, Marge, always dragged me here to feed those ravenous birds." Tom was silent, but something in the man's voice made him listen. He noticed the old man looking at the water, his eyes shining with memory. "You must be Tom," the man suddenly said, turning to him. "Emily's husband." Tom froze, his hand gripping the edge of the bench. "How do you know?" The man smiled, his gaze softening. "She talked about you often. I'm Jack. I live in that house across the street. Emily helped me when I broke my leg a couple of years ago. Brought me soup, can you believe it? Every day until I got back on my feet. Said it was her duty, because I reminded her of her grandfather." Tom felt his throat tighten. He vaguely remembered Emily talking about the neighbor she was helping, but he had been too busy with work to pay attention to the details. Now it seemed such an important part of her life, a part he had missed. "She was special," Jack continued, throwing another handful of food into the pond. "She always had time for others. She even helped me fix an old radio once. She said music was like a bridge between the past and the present." Tom nodded, not trusting his voice. He was looking at the ducks, but Emily was in his mind, with her eternal habit of interfering in the lives of others, helping even when her own strength was at its lowest. Jack left a few minutes later, leaving Tom on the bench with a bitter sense of loss and something else, a tiny glimmer of warmth. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he wasn't alone in his grief. Emily had left her mark not only on his life, but on the lives of others. That was her gift, the ability to touch hearts, even those who barely knew her. A little later, a young woman with a child approached the pond, a boy of about 5 years old, wearing a bright hat with a pompon. She held his hand while he enthusiastically threw pebbles into the water. The stones jumped across the surface with a cheerful slap, and Jake, laughing, jumped up and down with pleasure. Tom didn't want to stare, but his eyes sought out movement, as if life were pulling him toward itself in spite of himself. He watched the boy laugh, throwing back his head, and suddenly he remembered Emily saying that a child's laughter was the most honest sound in the world. The woman noticed his gaze and smiled. "You must be Tom," she asked softly, adjusting her scarf. "I'm Linda. Emily taught my son to draw at the library, those free classes on Saturdays. She was wonderful. I still can't believe it." Tom blinked in surprise. "Did you know Emily?" "A little," Linda nodded. "But enough to remember her. She always had words for Jake, even when he was angry that he couldn't draw dinosaurs. And then she showed him how to draw daisies. She said they were the happiest flowers." The boy, hearing his name, turned around sharply and ran up to them, holding a crumpled piece of paper in his hand. "This is for Emily," he said seriously, handing the paper to Tom. "I made it myself. See? The petals, just like she showed me. 7 of them. Real daisies have lots, but she said 7 was the magic number." Tom took the drawing. His fingers were shaking, but he forced himself to smile. "Thank you, Jake," he said hoarsely. She would. She would be so happy." "I wanted to give it to her," the boy added stubbornly, "when she comes back." Linda squeezed her son's hand lightly. "Jake, we told you. Emily left. But she said she'd be wherever there were flowers," he insisted, frowning. "And they are here." He pointed to the bushes along the bank, where lonely yellow petals clung to the last days of autumn. Linda looked at Tom guiltily. "Sorry," He still hopes. I do too, I guess. Tom shook his head. Don't apologize. He looked at the boy. You're right, Jake. You know, I think she's around here too. The boy nodded as if he had received confirmation of the most important thing in the world. Linda stepped back, pulling her son along. Emily said you make the world a more beautiful place with your homes, she added as she left. Don't forget that, and don't be afraid to start over. I will try, Tom answered, but the words stuck in his chest. When they left, he was alone, clutching the boy's drawing. The daisy was crooked, the lines trembled, the color almost erased. But there was something real in that unevenness. Humans, alive. He looked out at the water, where the last stone he'd thrown was still rippling, and for the first time in a long time, he felt not emptiness, but a slight, almost imperceptible, movement inside. Not pain, but interest. A glimmer of curiosity about the world Emily had left behind. Jake, Linda, this park, this letter, they were all part of her. Part of how she'd lived, and maybe part of the path he was meant to take next. He carefully folded the drawing and the letter, putting them in his pocket as if they were precious. He stood up and breathed in the cool air, full of the smell of wet leaves and distant smoke. And slowly he walked back along the path. The wind brushed his cheek, not a gust, but a touch. And Tom suddenly felt her. Not as a ghost, not as painful, but it was warm, like a light, like an inner voice that said, "You're going the right way." He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, Hai wanted to know. Tom stood by the kitchen window, watching the morning mist drift over the lawn like a thin blanket. His fingers were still warm from his coffee, but his mind was far away in the park, where yesterday's encounters with Jack and Linda had left him with a strange feeling. It wasn't relief, and it wasn't pain either, but something in between, as if he were beginning to see the world through more than just his grief. The drawing of little Jake with a daisy lay on the table next to Emily's 3 letters, and Tom found himself looking at it more often than he did at her words. Something about that childish sketch, its simplicity, its sincerity moved him more deeply than he cared to admit. He no longer checked his mailbox with the same feverish hopefulness he once had. It had become a ritual, almost sacred, but today he hesitated. Part of him wanted the mailbox to be empty, so he could pause, catch his breath. But another part of him, the part that still heard Emily's voice in every letter, pulled him toward the porch. He pulled on an old jacket, the one Emily always called his farm chic, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, with a faint tang of damp earth, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. The box did not disappoint. Another envelope, cream-colored, with his name written in her handwriting. Tom felt his heart skip a beat, but this time it was less fear and more anticipation. He went back into the house, sat down at the table, and carefully opened the letter, as if he were afraid to startle its contents. My beloved Tom, you were in the park, and I know it wasn't easy, but you felt something, right? Maybe it was the sound of a child's laughter or the smell of autumn leaves, but I know you started to see the world a little more clearly. You've always been like that, noticing details that others miss. That's one of the reasons I love you. Today, I want you to do something not for yourself, but for someone else. You will meet her, Tom. She is not like me, but there is something about her that is familiar to you. She needs help, and you can give it. Don't be afraid to open your heart, even a little. I know you think it's a betrayal, but it's not. Helping others does not mean forgetting me. It means continuing what we started together. Look for her where people gather, where life is in full swing, despite everything. She will be waiting, even if she doesn't know it. Yours, Amy. Tom reread the letter, his brows furrowing. You will meet her. It was too specific, too prophetic, not to make him shudder. Emily had always been intuitive, but this was beyond him. He tried to push away the idea that she somehow knew the future, but the words, woman in need of help, stuck in his head like a splinter. He folded the letter and shoved it in his pocket, deciding that he would not look for this mysterious her. If she existed, she would find him. But her words about a place where people gather sent his thoughts to the farmer's market on the main square. Emily loved that place, the rows of apples and pumpkins and homemade honey, the noisy voices of the vendors, and the smell of freshly baked bread. They often went there on Saturdays, buying cheese from an old man in a straw hat and laughing at Tom's attempts to haggle, even though he never succeeded. Maybe this was the place she was talking about. He shook his head, angry at himself for giving in to her instructions, but he grabbed his keys and headed for the car. The market was in full swing when Tom parked nearby. The air was buzzing with voices, laughter, and the jingle of coins. He wandered between the stalls, feeling like a stranger in the bustling crowd. People were buying vegetables, trying jams, discussing the weather, and he just walked, not knowing what he was looking for. His gaze slid over faces, but no one stood out. No one looked like her, whoever she was. At one of the stalls selling fresh flowers, he noticed a young woman standing a little to the side, holding the hand of a boy of about 6, who was tugging at her sleeve, asking her to buy him an apple. Her clothes were clean but shabby, and her face was tired, with dark circles under her eyes. She was speaking softly to the boy, her voice soft but tense. Tom stopped, wondering why he couldn't look away. Something about her, maybe her reserved smile, or the way she was smoothing her son's hair, reminded him of Emily. Not in her appearance, but in some elusive way in her quiet stoicism. He was about to pass by when the boy dropped his backpack, spilling several pencils and a notebook. Tom, without thinking, bent down to help gather his things. The woman looked at him, her eyes wary but grateful. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but warm. "He's always drooling." "It's okay," Tom said, handing her the notebook back. There was a daisy on the cover, crooked but recognizable. His heart fluttered, but he forced himself not to react. "It's a nice drawing." She smiled, a little awkwardly. "It's his. He likes daisies. He says they look like little suns." Tom nodded, feeling Emily's words in the letter echoing in his head. He didn't want to believe in coincidences, but this was too much. "My name is Tom," he said, not knowing why he was introducing himself. "What's yours?" "Sarah," she replied, then nodded toward the boy. "And this is Oliver." Oliver looked at Tom curiously, his big brown eyes studying him as if deciding whether he could be trusted. Tom smiled, and the boy, to his surprise, smiled back. They got to talking. Sarah told him she had recently lost her job at the local library because of layoffs, and that their rented apartment had flooded after a pipe burst, leaving her and Oliver living in a motel on the outskirts of town. Her words were measured, but Tom could sense her weariness, her struggle to keep things under control for their son. He listened, and for the first time in a long time, he wanted to do something rather than just leave. "Are you looking for a job?" he asked, almost surprised at his own words. "I know a couple of people in a construction company. They sometimes look for administrators or assistants." Sarah looked at him in surprise, her eyes narrowing as if she were looking for a catch. "Why do you want to help? You don't even know me." Tom shrugged, not quite sure what the answer was. "It just feels right." She nodded, but her eyes remained wary. They exchanged numbers, and Tom promised to ask his friends about job openings. When Sarah and Oliver left, he felt a strange sense of relief, as if he had done something that had long been expected of him. When Tom returned home, he reread Emily's letter. The phrase, "you will meet her," sounded less like a riddle and more like a prophecy. He couldn't explain how she could know about Sarah, but it didn't seem so impossible anymore. Emily had always been like that, seeing people, their pain, their hopes, and finding a way to help. Maybe this was her last wish, for him to continue her work. The next day, Tom called his old friend Mark, who worked for a construction company. After a short conversation, Mark agreed to meet Sarah, mentioning that they needed someone to do some paperwork. Tom sent Sarah a message, and she responded almost immediately, "Thank you, Tom. It means more than you know." He watched her words on the screen, feeling something stir within him, not love, not a replacement for Emily, but simply a desire to be useful. A few days later, Sarah called, sounding excited. She had gotten the job temporary, but with promise. She asked if she and Oliver could meet him in person to thank him. Tom was hesitant, but agreed. They met at the same coffee shop where Emily liked to order cinnamon lattes. Sarah arrived with Oliver, who was carrying another drawing, this one of a daisy with the words, "Thank you, Tom," written on it. Tom felt his throat tighten, but he smiled and accepted the gift. The conversation was light, but Tom noticed how Sarah was trying to hide her anxiety. She mentioned that the motel was getting too expensive, and she didn't know how long she could stay there. Tom, almost without thinking, offered, "I have a guest room. It's empty. If you want, you can stay there until you find something of your own." Sarah looked at him, her eyes full of doubt. "Are you serious? We barely know each other." "I know," Tom said, "but I've been there. Not literally, but I know what it's like when everything seems to be falling apart." She was silent, considering his words, and then nodded. "Only temporarily, and I'll pay you as soon as I can." Tom helped Sarah and Oliver move in that evening. The guest room was small but cozy, with a bed and a small desk. Oliver immediately began exploring the space, while Sarah stood in the doorway, still wary but grateful. Tom showed them where the bathroom and kitchen were and left them to settle in, feeling a strange combination of awkwardness and relief. That night, he sat in his room, staring at Emily's letters spread out on his bed. He didn't know how she could have foreseen Sarah, but it didn't seem so important anymore. For the first time in months, he felt like he was doing something right, something that made sense. Helping Sarah and Oliver hadn't forgotten Emily. In fact, he felt closer to her than ever. Her kindness, her warmth, lived in these small acts, and he was willing to continue, even if he didn't know where it would lead him. Tom woke up to a sound like the distant clinking of glass, but when he opened his eyes, he realized it was only rain drumming on the roof. The room was plunged into semi-darkness, and only the weak light of a street lamp penetrated through the curtains, drawing trembling patterns on the wall. He lay motionless, listening to the rhythm of the drops, which seemed to adjust to the ticking of the clock in the hallway. Sleep brought no relief. He was haunted by fragments of memories. Emily's laughter, her fingers running through his hair, and a daisy painted on the windowsill of a coffee shop. But now new images were mixed in with these: Sarah, her tired eyes, and Oliver clutching a pencil as if it were a magic wand. The guest room where Sarah and Oliver lived was quiet. Tom tried not to interfere with their lives, to give them space, but their presence changed the house. In the morning, he would hear Oliver humming while Sarah made him breakfast, and the sounds, so ordinary, would awaken a strange feeling in him, not warmth, but something close to hope. He wasn't ready to name it, but it kept him moving forward, even if each step seemed heavy. He took his time going to the mailbox today. Emily's previous letters on his desk were beginning to feel like part of his new reality, but each new message brought a wave of emotion he wasn't prepared for. He made coffee, but the mug remained untouched, his mind elsewhere. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, he stepped out onto the porch. The rain had left puddles in its wake, and the air smelled of wet leaves. The mailbox was cold to the touch, and inside, as he'd expected, was another envelope. The same cream color, the same handwriting, but this time something about it, maybe the slightly sharper lines of the letters, made Tom freeze. He didn't open it right away, but went back into the house, placing the envelope on the table like a dangerous artifact. Sarah and Oliver had gone to market, and the house was silent again. Tom sat staring at the envelope, feeling curiosity and fear warring within him. Emily's letters were becoming more and more personal, as if she were peering into the darkest corners of his soul. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what she would say this time, but her words, even through the paper, had a power over him that he couldn't resist. He took a letter opener, carefully cut the envelope open, and pulled out a sheet of paper that smelled, oddly enough, not of vanilla, but of something sharp, almost metallic, like the smell of rain on asphalt. "My beloved Tom, you are afraid. I can see it, even if you hide it behind your logic, behind your plans, behind this house you built to hide from the world. You are not afraid of the letters, not of me, but of yourself. You are afraid that if you let go of the pain, you will let go of me, and that makes you a coward, my dear. Forgive me for speaking so bluntly, but you know I have never been good at softening the truth. You cling to your grief like an anchor because it's become a part of you. You think the pain is all you have left of us. But it's not. I'm not in your tears, Tom. I'm in the way you helped Sarah and Oliver, the way you looked at the boy's drawing, the way you still listen to Sinatra, even though you say you hate him. You hide from life because you're afraid it will break you again. But you're already broken, my love. And that's okay. Broken things can be fixed if you're brave enough. Today, I want you to do something hard. Go back to our old attic. You know where it is, the box of my journals, the ones I kept when we first started dating. Read them, not all of them, but at least a few pages. They will remind you of who you were when I first fell in love with you, and maybe you will realize that that person is still inside you. I know you're mad at me for these letters. You might even want to destroy them, but you won't, because even if you don't believe me, you still believe in us. Yours, Amy. Tom threw the letter down on the table, his breathing heavy as if the air in the room had thickened. The anger she had written about flared up inside him like a fire caught in the wind. Coward, addicted to pain. How dare she? She, who had left him alone, who had died without giving him a chance to make things right, was now accusing him of weakness. His hands clenched into fists, and he felt the blood pounding in his temples. It was too much. Too cruel, too precise. He snatched the letter, crumpled it, but it was not enough. In his rage, he tore the paper into tiny pieces, throwing them to the floor where they scattered like autumn leaves. He stood, his footsteps echoing in the empty house, and headed for the attic stairs. His movements were sharp, almost mechanical, as if he wanted to prove to her, or to himself, that he was not afraid. But a storm raged inside him. Her words cut deeper than he expected, because they were true. He was afraid. Afraid to let her go, afraid to live without the pain that had become his only companion. And now, even in death, she saw it more clearly than he did. The attic greeted him with the smell of old wood and dust. Light filtered through a small round window, illuminating boxes covered in a gray film. Tom knew where to look. Emily's box of journals was in the corner, under a stack of old sketches of his projects. He pulled it out, coughing from the dust, and sat down on the floor, not caring that he was getting dirt on his jeans. The box was heavy, the lid creaking as he opened it. Inside were her journals, a few tattered notebooks with flowery covers, tied with ribbon. He untied the ribbon, feeling his fingers tremble. The first diary was dated the year they met. He opened it to a random page, and her handwriting the same as in the letters, but slightly less neat, flowed into his mind like a torrent. She wrote of him. Tom was arguing with me today about how to build bridges. He's so serious when he talks about his work, but when he smiles, I forget what we were talking about. I think I'm falling in love. Tom felt his throat tighten. He flipped through the pages, finding entries about their first dates, about the time he spilled coffee on her dress and nearly died of embarrassment, about how she loved to watch him while he drew his plans. Each line was like a prick, not painful, but warm, filled with her light. He read until he came across an entry made a few months before her illness. Sometimes I see him close off, like he's afraid that if he's too happy, everything will disappear. I want him to know that he's stronger than he thinks. Tom closed the diary, unable to read any further. She had seen his fear even then, long before he realized it himself. He walked back into the living room, his steps quieter, almost cautious. The scraps of the letter were still lying on the floor, and he knelt down, picking them up like a child who had broken a favorite toy and now regretted it. He smoothed the pieces out on the table, trying to put them back together, but the paper was too torn. Still, he couldn't throw it away. He put the scraps in her stationery box, as if they might still mean something. Like his for justice. Subscription to be with us, because we tell what is important. That evening, when Sarah and Oliver returned, Tom noticed Oliver tugging at his mother's hand, showing her a new drawing. Sarah looked at Tom and smiled, but he could tell it was a forced smile. He offered to cook dinner, and to his surprise, she agreed. They sat at the table, eating pasta, and Oliver chatted about how he had seen a dog with different colored eyes at the market. Tom listened, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't have to pretend to be interested. It was genuine. Later, after Oliver had fallen asleep, Sarah stayed in the kitchen, helping with the dishes. She began talking about her life, about being alone after Oliver's father left, about the struggle of holding everything in for her son. Tom listened without interrupting, and suddenly realized that her words, her struggle, her resilience echoed Emily's. Not because they were alike, but because Sarah, like Emily, kept going no matter what. Before going to bed, Tom returned to the box with the fragments of the letter. He did not try to glue them together, but he kept one piece on which was written, "You still believe in us." He didn't know what he believed, but he felt she was right. The anger was gone, leaving behind a quiet determination. He wasn't ready to let go of the pain, but maybe he was ready to try something else, something Emily wanted for him. And that, perhaps, was her real magic. Tom was awake. Night had fallen over the house, but the silence, usually so heavy, seemed alive, almost tangible, as if the air were thick with anticipation. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, where the shadows from the street lamp made ghostly patterns. The last few days had changed him, not radically, but enough that he had begun to notice the little things. Oliver's laughter, the smell of the coffee Sarah brewed in the morning, the soft creak of the floorboards under her footsteps. These sounds and images were slowly filling the void Emily had left, but he still wasn't sure he wanted them to. Each letter from her was like a beacon guiding him forward, but also like an anchor pulling him back toward the pain, toward their past. Morning came with gray light filtering through the curtains. Tom stood, feeling the weariness settle in his bones, and went to the mailbox. He was no longer surprised to find another envelope there, but today his fingers froze when he saw it, creamy as always, but slightly thicker, as if there were more pages inside. His name looked different in her handwriting, the lines of the letters seeming less sure, as if she hesitated as she wrote. The signature in the corner, "Yours, Amy," was the same, but there was a certain heaviness to it, as if these words carried more than usual. Tom walked back into the house without opening the envelope. He placed it on the kitchen table next to his empty coffee mug and stared at it for a long time, as if it were a bomb about to explode. Sarah and Oliver had gone to school, and the house was empty, except for the ticking of the clock. He knew he couldn't ignore the letter forever, but something told him that this one would be different from the previous ones. Finally, he took a knife, cut the envelope open, and pulled out several sheets of paper covered in her neat but slightly shaky handwriting. The smell of the paper was different, not vanilla, not rain, but something bitter, like old ink. He began to read, and from the first lines his heart sank with anticipation. "My beloved Tom, this letter will be the hardest I've ever written. I'm sitting here in our bedroom, listening to you sleep, trying to find the words that won't ruin everything we had. But I can't stay silent any longer. You deserve the truth, even if it breaks your heart like it breaks mine. I'm writing this because I love you, because I always have, and I will love you even if it makes you hate me. I'm sorry, Tom. Please, I'm sorry. I have to tell you about what happened in the months before I was diagnosed. I was lost, but I didn't show it. You were so busy with your work, your drawings, your projects, and I didn't blame you. You were always like that, passionate, absorbed in what you were creating. But I felt alone, even with you. I didn't know how to tell you, because I was afraid you'd think I was asking too much. You'd always been my anchor, but in those months I was starting to drown, and I didn't think you noticed." His name was David. He was an artist, one of the people who came to my watercolor class at the library. He wasn't you, Tom, and he never could be. But he was there when I felt invisible. He listened when I talked about my fears, about how sometimes I felt like I was losing myself in our life. It wasn't love. I want you to understand that. It was weakness, a fleeting, foolish affair that lasted only a few weeks. We'd meet in cafes, talk for hours, and one day I let him hold me. That was it, Tom. Nothing more. But even that was too much. I felt terrible. Every time I came home, I looked at you and hated myself for what I had done. I wanted to tell you, but every time I tried, the words stuck in my throat. I saw the way you looked at me, with such love, with such faith, and I couldn't break it. I knew you would never forgive me, and maybe you would have been right. But then the diagnosis came, and everything changed. I realized I couldn't leave without telling you the truth. Not because I wanted to ease my conscience, but because you deserved to know who I was, not just the Emily you loved, but the one who made mistakes, who was weak. I didn't love David. That's important. He was like a mirror in which I tried to see myself, but all I saw was emptiness. I loved you, Tom. I always have. Even in those moments with him, I thought of you, the way you frowned when you drew, the way you laughed when I teased you about your terrible taste in music. I wanted to come back to you, to us, but I didn't know how. And then the disease made the choice for me. I write this letter knowing it will hurt you. I see you reading it. I see your hands clenching, your eyes darkening with anger. And I don't blame you. You have every right to be angry, to hate me, to curse me. But I beg you, Tom, don't let this truth destroy everything we had. I was imperfect, I was human, but my love for you was real. It still is. I know you want to tear this letter up now, throw it away, forget it. Maybe you will. But I ask you to come back to it when the anger has subsided. Read it again, because in these words is me, all of me, with all my mistakes. And if you can forgive me, even a little, then maybe you will find the strength to forgive yourself. Because I know, Tom, you blame yourself for not noticing my loneliness, for not saving me. But you couldn't. It was my mistake, my weakness, not yours. I left you something else in my journal, the one with the blue cover. There's an entry I wrote after it all ended with David. Read it if you can. It'll show you how much I wanted to come back to you, even when I didn't know how. I love you, Tom. I always will, even if you can't love me anymore. Yours, Amy. Chapter 7. The Letter That Changes Everything. Markdown. Show in line. Tom froze, his breathing ragged as if the air in the room had turned to glass. The letter fell from his hands, sheets scattering across the table, some falling to the floor. His mind refused to process what he had read. David. The name cut like a knife, every memory of her now tainted. He had seen her laughing, dancing in the kitchen, holding him in the park, and it all felt betrayed now. She was with someone else. Not just physically, he could understand that, perhaps, but emotionally, giving someone else a part of herself that should have been his alone. Anger washed over him like a wave, washing away everything: nostalgia, warmth, hope. He grabbed the letter, crumpled it, but it wasn't enough. He tore the paper, piece by piece, his fingers shaking with rage. The scraps fell on the table, on the floor, mixing with the dust like fragments of his world. He wanted to scream, but his voice caught in his throat, a low, hoarse growl. How could she? How could she write these letters, full of love, full of her voice, and hide it? He felt betrayed, humiliated, as if everything he knew about her was a lie. He stood, his steps heavy, as if the floor were giving way beneath him. He wanted to leave, to run, but where? This was their home, her home, and even now, in his rage, he could not escape her presence. He stopped at the stairs, his gaze falling on the box of her journals he had brought down from the attic. The blue cover she had written about lay on top, a challenge. He did not want to open it, did not want to see her words, but something, her voice, perhaps, still echoing in his head, made him take the journal. He sat down on the floor, right there by the stairs, and opened to the page she had mentioned. The date was a few weeks before her diagnosis. Her handwriting was hurried, almost feverish. I made a mistake. David was mistaken. I thought he would help me find myself, but all I found was emptiness. I look at Tom when he's asleep, and I hate myself for what I did. He deserves better. He deserves all of me. I want to go back to him, to us, but I don't know how to fix this. I won't tell him, not because I'm afraid, but because I don't want him to see me as someone I don't want to be. I love him. God, I love him. Tom closed the journal, his hands shaking. He didn't know what he felt: anger, pain, or something else that had no name. He went back to the table where the fragments of the letter lay and began to gather them up, slowly, carefully, as if they might still mean something. He couldn't glue them back together, but he put them in the box, next to the other letters, as if they were a part of her he wasn't ready to let go of. That evening, when Sarah and Oliver returned, Tom was quiet, but not cold. He listened to Oliver talk about his day, and even smiled when the boy showed him a new drawing. But inside him, a storm raged. Emily had betrayed him, but she had also shown him the truth, and in that truth was her love, imperfect but true. He didn't know if he could forgive her, but he knew he couldn't forget. And maybe that was her last request, not to let him forget who she was, with all her mistakes, and who he was, despite everything. Tom sat on the living room floor, surrounded by the fragments of his past. The floorboards beneath him were cold against his skin, and the air was thick with the smell of old paper and something acrid, as if his own rage had left its mark on the room. In front of him was the box in which he had kept photographs of Emily, their wedding album, pictures from picnics, her smiling face against the sunset. Now the photographs were torn, crumpled, some reduced to tiny shreds, as if he were trying to erase not just her image, but everything she had stood for. The last letter she had written, confessing about David, lay in tatters on the table, and every time he looked at it, he felt like a punch in the gut. He could not bear her words, her remorse, her love, which now seemed poisoned. The anger that had flared up after reading it didn't fade, but turned into something heavier, a black, sticky void that sucked in everything he tried to feel. He didn't cry. Tears would have been too easy, and he didn't deserve ease. He felt betrayed not only by her, but by himself, for letting her letters draw him into this game, for believing she could still be with him. He looked at the torn photographs, at her smile, now cut in half, and felt something inside him break completely. Sarah and Oliver returned that evening, their footsteps and quiet voices echoing down the hall. Tom did not come out to join them. He sat in the living room, in the dark, listening to Oliver talk about school, and Sarah answering softly but wearily. Their presence, which had seemed like salvation yesterday, now irritated him like sand in a wound. They were strangers in his world, in his pain, and he could no longer pretend otherwise. When Sarah came into the living room carrying a plate of sandwiches, she stopped at the chaos on the floor. "Tom," her voice was cautious, as if she was afraid of scaring him off. "Is everything okay?" He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the photograph of Emily, laughing and holding a daisy. "You need to go," he said, his voice low, almost alien. "Today." Sarah froze, her hand shaking with the plate. "What happened? Did we do something wrong?" "This isn't about you," he snapped, finally looking up. They were empty, as if someone had turned off the light inside him. "Just go. Find another place. I can't do this anymore." Oliver, standing in the doorway, looked at him with wide eyes, his small backpack still slung over his shoulder. "But you said we could stay," he said quietly, his voice shaking. Tom clenched his jaw, feeling his heart squeeze. He didn't want to hurt the boy, but he couldn't stop himself. "I'm sorry," he managed to say. "Just go away." Sarah didn't argue. She gathered their things in silence, her movements quick but not harsh, as if she was trying not to destroy the fragile trust that was between them. An hour later they were gone, and the house was empty again, only the creak of the door closing behind them echoing in his chest. He didn't see them out. He sat on the floor amid the torn photographs, feeling the silence become unbearable. The next day, Tom called his boss and told him he was quitting. His voice was flat, emotionless, as if he were reading from a blueprint. Mark, his boss, tried to object, reminding him of the project Tom was leading, the clients who were waiting for his sketches. But Tom cut him off. "Find someone else. I'm done." He hung up without waiting for an answer and turned off the phone. The work that had once been his passion now seemed pointless, like blueprints for a house that would never be built. The days blurred together. Tom rarely left the house, except to buy groceries, and even then he avoided the neighbors. He didn't shave or clean, letting the dishes pile up in the sink and the dust settled on the furniture. The house he'd once built with such love felt like an abandoned blueprint, abandoned halfway through. He slept fitfully on the couch or in a chair because their bed was too full of her scent, her presence. He didn't turn on the music, didn't look at the letters, didn't touch the box of her things. Anything that reminded him of her was like salt in an open wound. His depression wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, like a fog that slowly envelops everything until it's impossible to breathe. He didn't cry, he didn't scream, he didn't drink, he simply existed, like a ghost in his own house. Sometimes he found himself staring out the window, waiting for something but not knowing what. The world outside seemed alien, and he was alien to himself. One morning, a week after Sarah and Oliver had left, he noticed a new envelope in the mailbox. It was the same as the other's cream, with his name written in her handwriting. But this time he felt no curiosity, no fear, no hope, only weariness. He took the envelope but did not open it. Instead, he tossed it on the table with the other letters, which he no longer read. He did not want her words, did not want her apology or her love. He wanted her to leave him alone. But the envelope lay there, a silent reproach, its presence growing more tangible with each passing day. Tom tried to ignore it, but his gaze kept returning to the cream-colored paper, to her handwriting that still seemed alive. He hated himself for it, for not being able to just throw it away, burn it, forget it. He hated her for still dragging him back, even after all he had learned. One night, when the rain began to pound the windows again, he couldn't take it anymore. He sat down at the table, picked up the envelope, and held it in his hands for a long time, feeling the paper cool against his fingers. He didn't want to open it, but he knew he would. Not because he wanted to hear her, but because he couldn't help it. It was his weakness, his dependency, just as she had written. He cut the envelope open, but he didn't take out the letter. Instead, he put it back on the table, closed his eyes, and leaned back in his chair. He wasn't ready. Not yet. The days continued to flow, each one a little darker than the last. Tom stopped going out even for groceries, living on what was left in the refrigerator: canned goods, crackers, coffee that had long since lost its taste. He did not look in the mirror, but he knew that his face had changed. The stubble had turned into a beard, his eyes had sunken, his skin had become gray, like the walls of the house. He did not feel hunger, did not feel time. Only emptiness, which grew like a crack in the foundation. Sometimes he thought about Sarah and Oliver. He didn't know where they were, but he hoped they'd found a place where they were happy. He regretted sending them away, but he couldn't find it in himself to fix it. His world shrank to the walls of the house, to the scraps of photographs, to the letter he'd never opened. He imagined Emily looking at him, not with judgment, but with the same soft sadness she'd had in her eyes these past few days. And that was the worst thing. Because despite the betrayal, despite the pain, he still loved her, and he hated himself for it. That night, as the storm outside grew worse, Tom picked up the envelope again. He didn't open it, but he held it close to his chest, as if that would make a difference. He didn't know what to do next, but he knew he couldn't go on like this forever. The letter was like the last bridge between him and her, and even if he wasn't ready to cross it, he couldn't burn it. Not yet. Tom sat on the porch, watching the morning light break through the clouds, leaving silvery patches on the wet grass. The rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy, damp, and bitter, like his own thoughts. The house behind him felt strange, not the place he had built with Emily, but a cold shell where the echo of her voice mingled with his own emptiness. The envelope, the one he had never opened, lay in his pocket, its corners frayed from where Tom touched it every now and then, as if checking to see if it had disappeared. He didn't know why he hadn't torn it open like the last one, but something held him, not hope, but something more fragile, almost intangible. The days since Sarah and Oliver had left had been a blur. Tom hadn't counted them and hadn't kept track of time. His world had narrowed to the walls of the house, to the dusty corners and the torn photographs he'd never picked up from the floor. He'd kept the lights off, the windows closed, letting the darkness and the silence consume him. But this morning, as he stepped out onto the porch with his cold coffee, he'd felt a slight twinge, not pain, but something else. Maybe it was the wind carrying the scent of freshly cut grass, or the distant laughter of children playing outside. Something had made him stop and take a deep breath. He hadn't planned on calling his father. They hadn't spoken in months, not because of a fight, but simply because Tom didn't know what to say. His father, Henry, was a man of few words, with the hard hands of a bricklayer and a look that saw more than it said. But today, sitting on the porch, Tom felt he couldn't hold it in any longer. He pulled out the phone, which he hadn't turned on since he quit his job, and dialed. The ringing seemed endless, but finally his father's voice, husky and familiar, answered. "Tom, is that you?" "Yes, Dad," he said, his voice shaking, giving away more than he intended. "Can I come over?" An hour later, Tom was at his father's house, a small cottage on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a garden that Henry stubbornly maintained despite his arthritis. The living room smelled of old wood and the tobacco his father smoked when he thought no one was looking. They were sitting at the table, mugs of tea in front of them, which Tom did not drink. Henry looked at him, his eyes faded with age, but still sharp, studying his son like a blueprint. "You look like you've been run over by a truck," Henry said, taking a sip of tea. "What's wrong, son?" Tom didn't know where to begin. He hadn't told anyone about the letters, about her confession, about how his world had collapsed in an instant. But now, with his father watching, the words began to flow. He told her everything about the letters that had come as if from a ghost, about her requests, about her betrayal with David, about how he had torn up the photographs and sent Sarah and Oliver away. He spoke without looking at his father, his voice low, almost monotone, but inside him there was a storm raging. When he finished, the room was silent, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the mantelpiece. Henry was silent for a long time, rubbing his calloused palm. Finally, he sighed and said, "You know, when your mother died, I was angry too. Not at her, but at the whole world. At God, at myself, at her illness. I thought if I held on to this anger, it would somehow keep her around. But all it did was eat me up from the inside." Tom looked up, his eyes dry but full of pain. "She betrayed me, Dad. She was with someone else. How can I forgive that?" Henry shook his head. "Forgiveness isn't for her, Tom. It's for you. You hold on to that pain like a life preserver, but it's dragging you down. Emily was human, and humans make mistakes. She loved you, you know that, even if you don't want to admit it. But you don't have to bear her mistake like a cross." "I don't know how to let go," Tom admitted, his voice barely audible. "She's still here, in these letters, in this house, in everything." "She'll always be with you," Henry said, his voice softening. "But not in the pain, in what you do next. You sent that woman and her son away because you were afraid that helping them would somehow betray Emily. But maybe that was her way of reminding you of who you are. You've always been a man who builds, not a man who destroys." Tom was silent, his father's words echoing in his head. He thought of Sarah, her tired smile, Oliver's drawing of a daisy. He thought of the letters that lay untouched, and how he had let his anger destroy everything that could have been a new beginning. He wasn't ready to forgive Emily, but his father's words had touched something inside him, not a bright spark, but a quiet, smoldering ember. Back home, Tom sat in the living room for a long time, looking at the envelope he had never opened. He felt like he was on the edge of a precipice, where one step could either save him or break him completely. Talking to his father hadn't taken away the pain, but it had given him something else, the understanding that he didn't have to stay in this darkness. He took the envelope, his fingers shaking, not from anger, but from something new, almost forgotten the desire to live on. He cut the envelope open, slowly, as if he was afraid the paper would hurt him. The paper inside was thin, almost weightless, and her handwriting was soft, without the tremors of the previous letter. Tom took a deep breath and began to read. "My beloved Tom, I won't apologize again. I know my last letter broke your heart, and I hate myself for it. I won't make excuses, explain why I did what I did. You know the truth, and that's enough. I'm not writing this to ease my conscience, but to set you free. Live, Tom. I may have made mistakes, I may have been weak, I may have broken what we were building, but you don't have to be my punishment. You don't have to carry my guilt, my pain, my mistakes. I want you to remember what it was like to feel the sun on your skin, to laugh at a stupid joke, to build something that makes the world a better place. I know you're angry, and that's your right. But don't let that anger become your prison. You were always more than my love for you. You were a man who saw beauty in lines, in structure, in the way things fit together to create something solid. I want you to go back to that. Not for me, but for you. For the Tom who danced with me in the kitchen, who built our house, who looked at me like I was the world. I don't know how these letters reach you. I don't know why they come now, but I know that they are my last gift to you. Not the last in order, perhaps, but the last in meaning. I want you to live, Tom, not for me, but for yourself. And if you ever find the strength to forgive me, know that I will always love you. Even from here, from where I am now. Yours, Amy. Tom lowered the letter, his hands shaking, but not with anger. Her words were simple, without excuses, without attempts to soften the pain. They were honest, and there was freedom in that honesty. He didn't feel like he'd forgiven her, not completely, not yet. But he felt like he could breathe a little easier, as if someone had opened a window in a stuffy room. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in months, he wanted to know. He stood up, walked to the window, and opened it. Cold air rushed into the room, bringing with it the smell of wet earth and the distant sound of cars. Tom looked out onto the street, where the neighbors' children were riding their bikes, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like this was an alien world. He wasn't ready to go back to work, wasn't ready to find Sarah and Oliver, wasn't ready to build something new. But he was ready to take the first step, and that might be enough. Tom stood in front of a motel on the edge of town, his boots sinking into the gravel and his hands cold in the pockets of his old jacket. The sky was gray but not raining, just a gentle breeze stirring the leaves that had piled up near the porch. The motel looked just as he had imagined, run down, with peeling paint and a neon sign that flickered as if it couldn't decide whether to open or not. He didn't know if Sarah and Oliver were still there, but it was the only place he could start. After his conversation with his father and Emily's last letter, her words, live, "You don't have to be my punishment," lodged themselves in him like a splinter, giving him no peace. He wasn't ready for grand gestures, for loud apologies or new beginnings. But he was ready to do something, anything. He knocked on the door of the room the woman at the front desk had given him after he had described Sarah and Oliver. The door opened slowly and Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face tired but not surprised, as if she had expected him to come. Oliver was sitting on the bed behind her, doodling on a pad, and looked up to see Tom. "Tom?" Sarah adjusted her hair, her voice cautious but not cold. "What are you doing here?" He shrugged, feeling awkward, like a teenager who doesn't know how to start a conversation. "I wanted to apologize for sending you away. It was wrong." Sarah looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if searching for a catch. "You weren't yourself," she said finally. "I don't hold a grudge." "Whatever," Tom said, shifting from foot to foot. "I want to help. If you're still here, if you need anything, just say so." Oliver ran to the door, holding his notebook. "You're back," he said, and his smile was so genuine that Tom felt something in his chest unclench. "Look, I drew another daisy. For you." Tom picked up the paper that had a picture of a daisy on it, a little crooked but bright, with a yellow center that looked as if the boy had tried his best. "Thank you, Oliver," he said, and his voice was softer than he had expected. "It's beautiful." Sarah invited him in, and they sat at a small table by the window. The room was small, with faded wallpaper and the smell of cheap detergent, but there was something alive about it. Oliver's toys scattered about, a stack of books on the nightstand, his drawings taped to the wall. Sarah explained that her job at the construction firm was temporary, and that they were still living in the motel because finding an apartment on her salary was nearly impossible. Tom listened without interrupting, and felt the urge to do something grow in him, not for redemption, not for Emily, but simply because it was the right thing to do. "I have a friend," he said finally. "He rents out a small apartment not far from the center. Not luxurious, but clean. I can talk to him if you like." Sarah looked at him, her gaze a mixture of gratitude and wariness. "Why are you doing this, Tom? You don't have to." He paused, choosing his words. Because I can, he said simply, and because I need to move on. She nodded, as if she understood more than he had said. Okay, thank you. Tom helped Sarah and Oliver move in a few days later. The flat was small, with one bedroom and a tiny kitchen, but it was warm and overlooked a park where Oliver could play. Tom helped carry their things, a few bags, a box of books, Oliver's backpack full of pencils and paper. He didn't say much, but his presence, calm and unobtrusive, seemed to calm Sarah. Oliver chartered away, as always, talking about school, about the dog he'd seen in the park, about how he wanted to paint a whole garden of daisies. Tom listened, and for the first time in months, his smile was not forced but real. After leaving his job at an architectural firm, Tom didn't know what to do with himself. His savings lasted for a few months, but he knew he couldn't sit at home, lost in his thoughts, any longer. He began looking for something simple that wouldn't require his old passion for drawing and designing. A week later, he came across an ad in the local newspaper. A hardware store was looking for a salesperson. The job was a far cry from his old life, but there was something appealing about it, its routine, the lack of pressure to be more than he was now. He started working at the store the following week. The work was simple: shelving merchandise, helping customers choose paint or tools, and occasionally sweeping the floor. His co-workers, an older man named Roy and a younger woman named Liz, were friendly but not pushy. Tom was grateful for that. He came in the morning and left at night, and there was something comforting about the rhythm. He wasn't building houses or creating masterpieces, but every day, helping someone find the right screw or showing them how to paint a fence, he felt a little more alive. Sarah and Oliver had become a part of his life, but not in the way he'd feared. This wasn't a replacement for Emily, an attempt to fill a void. This was something else, a quiet, almost imperceptible connection that grew out of small moments. When Oliver showed him a new drawing, when Sarah shared a story about how her boss had complimented her on her neatness, when the three of them had tea together in their new apartment, Tom didn't ask for anything more from them than they could give, and maybe that's why he felt at ease with them. One evening, when Tom returned home from his shift at the store, he noticed that the house no longer seemed so empty. He cleared away the scraps of photographs that still lay on the floor and even dusted the shelves. He did not restore the photographs, that would have been too much, but he put them in a box, along with the letters he still had. He did not reread them, but he touched the envelopes occasionally, feeling the paper beneath his fingers remind him of her. Not of her mistake, not of her pain, but of her voice, still echoing in his head. Emily was right about one thing. He was starting to learn to feel again. It wasn't a big return to life, no bright colors or sudden happiness. It was small steps. The smell of fresh paint in the store, Oliver's laughter when he told a stupid joke, the warm look in Sarah's eyes when she thanked him for helping him. He hadn't forgiven Emily completely. The pain of her betrayal still lingered inside him like an old scar, but he was beginning to understand that the forgiveness his father had talked about wasn't for her, but for himself. It was a release from the chains he'd put on himself. One day, while helping Oliver with his drawing homework, Tom found himself drawing a daisy, a simple one, with uneven petals, but the kind Emily would have liked. Oliver looked at his drawing and laughed. "You're doing better than me," he said, and Tom smiled, feeling a warmth spreading in his chest. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't make plans, didn't dream of great things. But he lived, slowly, uncertainly, but he lived. And there was something in it that he hadn't expected. The feeling that he could be himself again, not for Emily, not for the past, but for who he was now. And maybe that was enough. Tom woke early, when the sky was still gray, with thin threads of gold just beginning to poke through the clouds. Today was the day he had been dreading all year, the anniversary of Emily's death. He hadn't planned to mark it, hadn't wanted any rituals or remembrances, but the date hung over him anyway, like a shadow he couldn't shake. He lay in bed, listening to the house slowly come to life, the creak of the floorboards under Sarah's feet in the kitchen, the quiet murmur of Oliver, who was probably already drawing something at the table. Their presence in his life had become as familiar as breathing, not loud, but necessary. Tom got up, put on an old flannel shirt, and went downstairs. Sarah was making toast, her hair in a messy bun, and Oliver was sitting at the table surrounded by pencils and paper. He looked up at Tom and smiled. "Good morning. I'm drawing a bird. Would you like to see it?" Tom nodded, coming closer. The paper showed a clumsy blue bird with a huge beak, more like a cartoon character than anything real. "Cool," he said, his voice soft, almost warm. "It looks like it could sing something cheerful." Oliver laughed, and Sarah looked at Tom with a slight smile. "You're early today," she said, handing him a mug of coffee. "Everything okay?" He shrugged, accepting the mug. Just couldn't sleep. He didn't mention the date, or how it weighed on him like an old bruise. Sarah hadn't asked, and he was grateful for her silence. After breakfast, he went out onto the porch to get the paper. The mailbox was cold, covered with morning dew, and Tom was used to finding envelopes there. But today, when he opened it, his heart sank. Another envelope, the last one, he knew, though he couldn't explain why. Cream paper, his name, her handwriting. But this time the envelope was thinner, almost weightless, as if there was something fragile inside, ready to crumble at a single touch. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he went back into the house, put the envelope on the table, and went to work, leaving it lying there like an unsolved problem. The day at the hardware store passed quietly. Tom laid out paint cans, helped an old woman choose a brush, and joked with Roy about how he always mixed up the inventory numbers. The work was simple, but he found something grounding in that simplicity, as if each screw, each can of paint, helped him stand on his feet. He didn't think about the letter, but he felt it, like a little prick in the back of his head, a reminder that it was waiting. When he got home, he found Sarah and Oliver having dinner. They were eating the pizza Sarah had ordered, and Oliver was talking about how they had learned to make origami in school. Tom joined them, listening to the boy explain that his paper crane was crooked, but still almost flew. Sarah was laughing, and her laughter was light, like the wind that brings the scent of spring. Tom watched them, and something warm stirred in his chest, something that was not connected to Emily but did not betray her. It was his, theirs, new. After dinner, when Oliver had run off to draw and Sarah was washing up, Tom returned to the table where the envelope lay. He picked it up, feeling the paper crackle slightly under his fingers. His heart was beating steadily, without the chaos that had accompanied the previous letters. He was not afraid, not angry, he was ready. He cut the envelope open and pulled out the contents. There was no long letter inside, as he had expected. Just one photograph, their wedding picture, the one where Emily was laughing, and he was looking at her with such love that even now it seemed almost unbearable. On the back of the photograph, in her handwriting, was a single question: "Are you happy?" Tom froze, holding the photograph in his hands. He didn't cry. Tears would have been too easy an answer, and this moment demanded something more. He looked at her face, at her smile, and for the first time in a year, he didn't feel pain. Instead, he felt something light, almost weightless, as if someone had lifted an invisible weight from his shoulders. He smiled not widely, not joyfully, but quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a man who is just beginning to remember how to do it. He stood up, gathered up all the letters he had kept in the box, and carried them out to the backyard. There, in an old tin can, he folded them carefully, as if it were a ritual. He did not read them, did not touch them longer than he had to. He simply held a match to the paper and watched the flames slowly consume her words, her voice, her love. The smoke rose into the sky, taking the ashes with it, and Tom felt no loss. It was not annihilation, it was released. He had not forgotten her, he had not stopped loving her, but he was no longer attached to her shadow. The ashes settled on the grass, and Tom went back into the house. He hadn't thought about the question in the photograph, but he knew the answer. Not a loud yes, not a happy exclamation, but a quiet, almost elusive feeling that he was on the way to something real. He wasn't happy in the way the movies showed, but he was alive, and that was enough. The next morning, Tom woke up with a lightness he hadn't felt in a long time. He made coffee, helped Oliver pack his backpack for school, and helped Sarah find her keys, which she was always losing. They walked out of the house together, and Tom took Sarah's hand without thinking. It wasn't a romantic gesture, not a promise of something more, it was just natural, like breathing. Oliver walked ahead, bouncing, his backpack swaying on his back, and Sarah squeezed Tom's hand, her fingers warm and slightly rough from work. They walked to school, the morning light falling on the pavement, reflecting in the puddles left by the night's rain. Children were shouting in the playground, cars were honking in the distance, and the air smelled of freshly cut grass. Tom looked at Oliver, who was waving his arms, talking about his new drawing, and at Sarah, who was listening with a soft smile. He had not forgotten Emily, her face, her laugh, her daisies still lived in him as a part of himself. But he no longer lived in the past. He lived here, now, in this morning, in this hand, in this boy who ran ahead, calling him to look at the cloud that looked like a bird. It wasn't a happy ending in the classic sense. There were no fireworks, no loud confessions or promises of eternal love. It was a new life, quiet, imperfect, but real. Tom moved forward, step by step, and for the first time in a year, he felt that this was his road, and he was ready to take it. Thank you for listening to the end. If you like this story, please support it with a like and a comment. It really inspires us to create new episodes. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. It will definitely surprise you. See you soon, and may your life be filled with more good stories. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even click to the next one.